Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for this GA4GH 101 session, primarily scheduled to help folks new to GA4GH who are coming to plenary or going to be attending plenary virtually, but really for anybody who has any interest in GA4GH. Sasha and I will kind of go over everything you ever wanted to know about this beautiful organization. So first we'll start with introductions. My name is Angela Page. I am the Chief Strategy and Engagement Officer. I'm based at the Broad Institute in Cambridge, US. Sasha?
And I am Sasha Siegal, and Chief Product Officer, and I'm hosted at Emble EBI in Cambridge, UK.
Fabulous. So, Ginny or Arwa, could one of you post the link to Slido in the chat, please? This is heads up to all of you attending. If you have questions, as Sasha and I are going through the presentation, you can either write them down and ask them with your voice at the end, or you can put them into Slido using the link that will be in the chat momentarily. I think it'll say, yeah, it should direct you straight to the thing, but if you have problems, let us know in chat. Yeah, so you can add questions throughout, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll go through questions. If you want to unmute and ask your question verbally, we can support that by, if you raise your hand, we can unmute you. There's also a very cool feature on Zoom now, which is automated caption translation, which we have enabled. If you go down to the bottom of your screen and you should be able to see something that says captions and view captions or something like that, you just have to set your speaking language so that it will translate Sasha's and my words into your language if you wish to utilize that. It's pretty good. Some languages are better than others, but we've managed to have multilingual conversations amongst people that do not speak the same language. It's been pretty amazing because we're living in the future. Okay. All right, so let's get started. As I'm sure I don't need to tell anybody in this room, genomics has seen a massive change. Genomics has seen massive and ongoing changes in technology over the last 25 years. Since the release of the first draft of the human genome. So the cost of sequencing has gone down very, very fast, faster than Moore's Law, to the degree that sequence data is now coming into the public domain and in other sectors at an exponential rate. This is a back of the envelope kind of analysis, not peer reviewed, but by Berkeley Genomics, showing that there are at least 2 million human genomes sitting around the globe today. So GA4GH has kind of tried to do landscape analysis of that essentially that sort of virtual cohort of genomic data. And we've pinpointed at least 200 genomic data initiatives that are sitting in various sectors across the globe: clinical genomic medicine, research data coming out of national genomic sequencing initiatives, and other cohort efforts. Clinical research, pharmaceutical companies, that's all over the place, as you all know. GA4GH's goal is essentially, and this is sort of like the ambitious ultimate goal, is to tie all of that data together as a kind of a virtual cohort of tens of millions of individuals that we can search across and use to inform better research and improve human health and wellness. We know that sufficiently large heterogeneous data sets have the ability to demonstrate patterns in health and disease, increase statistical significance of these analyses. Variant interpretations are stronger when you have these larger data sets. Diagnoses are more accurate. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to do at GA4GH. Since the data is distributed globally and everybody kind of does things slightly differently, jurisdictional rules are, different, very different across national borders. We at GA4GH have sort of committed to this idea that in order to achieve this vision, we need interoperable standards in order to answer today's most pressing medical questions and using precision medicine and genomics to do so. So that is our mission. We accelerate progress in genomic science and human health by developing standards and framing policy for responsible genomic and health-related data sharing. The very first output of GA4GH was released in 2014, about a year or so after we were founded. This was the framework for responsible sharing of genomic and health-related data, which sets forward the sort of foundational principles of data sharing in the GA4GH community, which are respect for individuals, families, communities, the sort of focus on advancing research and scientific knowledge, promoting health, well-being, and fair distribution of benefits, and fostering trust, integrity, and reciprocity. There's a slide later, I wish it was here, but this point about fair distribution of benefits. So GA4GH was founded on the human right to benefit from science. So this framework for responsible sharing actually kind of activates this otherwise dormant human right written out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948, which said that all humans have the right to benefit from scientific advancement and to be recognized for their contributions. So the idea behind this framework and behind sort of the way GA4GH approaches data sharing is not so much to focus on the risks of sharing, although that is an important question that we do look at, but also on the risks of not sharing. So you have these many millions of human genomes distributed around the globe. If we do not efficiently, effectively connect these data together, we are not activating the human right to benefit and not sort of realizing all of those benefits that I outlined earlier. So that's sort of like the underlying sensibility, I guess, of GA4GH as an organization. So our organization, our ecosystem, we have over 500 organizational members. It's closer to 600 at this point, I think. These are organizations, there's a very, very low barrier to entering, to becoming an organizational member of GA4GH. It's essentially a statement of kind of values that you agree with this GA4GH principle of genomic data sharing benefiting human health and well-being. So being an organizational member there's no financial commitment and there's really no functional commitment either. It's really just kind of a statement about your values as an organization. A subset of those organizational members, however, are what we call driver projects. And these are organizations that have made it a commitment to contributing to GA4GH activities, committing to supporting standards development, as well as implementing early versions of standards in a pilot sort of phase so that we can improve those standards after real world sort of tire kicking. The 28 driver projects are there to sort of ensure that we have good representation across those 200 plus genomic data initiatives, many hundreds of organizations, that we are really responding to the needs of the community. So the driver projects are across, various sectors. They're all kind of focused on a slightly different piece of the genomic data lifecycle in order to make sure that we have good representation across the whole community. You do not need to be a driver project to participate in GA4GH. It is just there to ensure that we have good representation. These 350 plus contributors are actual individual humans who sit on our 8 work streams and contribute to the production of our currently 40 plus products, which are the policy frameworks and standards, technical standards that I mentioned earlier. Those individuals come from driver projects, organizational members. They also are just individuals who have a personal interest in this work. Oftentimes they are folks who in their day job have some kind of mandate that depends on interoperability, and so it makes sense for them to be here. Sometimes it's people doing it out of the goodness of their heart, and it's a really incredible community for that reason. This community spans over 100 countries, and we are aware of at least 200 implementations and deployments of the standards that have been released in their first version, although this is something that we are working to get a better, more accurate metric on. And from here, I will kick it over to Sasha to get into the really interesting, detailed stuff. Oops, I just declined your request. Try again. There you go.
Okay, I put it back on there. Should be there now.
Go for it.
So let me check and see that that works.
Great.
Okay, it does, but now I don't know. There we go. Okay, awesome. Hi everyone. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of some of the technical work that GA4GH does, and I think it's important to really start with one of the biggest transformational changes that we've seen in the last few years in data analysis in general, which is this concept of federated analysis. And I think that, you know, when we had smaller amounts of data, the idea was, okay, let's centralize all of that data, bring it all together. But increasingly now, data is being distributed across the globe. And so we need to move our analysis to data. And in some cases, that means data that is located in lots of different locations under various elements of control by the data custodians. And so this presents a lot of unique challenges, but also some excellent opportunities. And so I think that over time, we can move towards a system that really respects the guardianship of data while allowing us to really leverage healthcare data to make incredible discoveries. And so this concept of federation also supports scalability. And so as the data is generated at scale worldwide, we sort of need an infrastructure that can allow that secure, ethical, and efficient ability to scale. And so I think GA4GH is doing a really good job of focusing in on this and being part of the solution in terms of federation. So this is a very busy slide. So let me just start with that. But it's important to sort of recognize that there is a life cycle of how data moves throughout the genomic space. And it begins with participants and it ends with the return of insights back into the care and policy of humankind. And so this continuous loop of improvement and learning is a big focus on what we do, and we're trying to build standards that actually speak to each of these different sections of that life cycle. And let's see. Yeah, so we've got a poll, and it would be great for people to contribute if you can join Slido using the QR code there. Just give us an idea of what of these sections of that life cycle are of particular interest to this group. And that way I can spend a little bit more time on some of these sections versus others. I'll just give us a little bit of time to get on there and to register your interest. Sorry, we have on the chat that the voting is closed. Arlo and Ginny. There we go. Open now. Excellent. Thank you. All right, I think we're starting to coalesce around some of the more techie things, which that's convenient for me, honestly, as Chief Product Officer. So I can focus a little bit more on some of those things. So it looks like discovering data and tools and infrastructure for data security. It looks like a lot of tech-related elements actually coming across here. I will very briefly speak to some of the policy elements, but again, if we've got a lot of folks focused on data, I can do my best to sort of focus in on those. All right. So quickly, this is a little bit about policy and engagement. So I think it's important, I think we all know it's important that we need to start with the participation of people in this ecosystem that have contributed their data. And so this is really the heart of our life cycle, and it's important to provide concrete guidance to ensure that underrepresented populations are included in data collection and governance. And this type of work is really well complemented by Your DNA, Your Say, and that explores global genomic attitudes toward data sharing. We also have something called our engagement framework, which supports participant-centered research design. And finally, the Public Attitudes for Genomic Policy series, which informs policy through community insights. And the next one is on standardized and machine-readable consent. So I'm not going to belabor the point on some of these bits, but just needless to say, I think that we are very supportive of responsible and interoperable consent through several key resources, and those are listed here. If you want to know a little bit more about those, please feel free to check out the policy documents on our website. And we will be sharing how to engage with lots of our different products a little bit later. So here's one that people were a little bit more interested in on the data side. And so this is a really important and flagship space for GA4GH. So this is where the file formats live. And it may be surprising for some of you to hear, but actually some of the landmark file formats that are used in genomic analysis are GA4GH products. And those are including VCF, SAM, CRAM, BED, and also encryption capabilities for genomic sequencing data, and that would be solved by GA4GH. And so this is a little bit around, again, moving through the cycle, recording family health history. So it's just important to flag that actually there is a family history toolkit that can support that part of the process. Oversight and ethical review, another policy engaged at it's involved with ethics review and recognition. And then here's another one that was of interest. So infrastructure for data security. So I think that overall, I think we have some of the most exciting things going on in this space right now. And so I would lean towards talking about some of the technical aspects of what we do with data security, but it is important to mention that we do also have policies and a forum as well for health data sharing that's worth mentioning, but I'm going to start getting into those sort of technical bits next. So that's where they are. This is the Passport and AAI standard and also APIs. And those are a really exciting piece of work that GA4GH is doing. I'll start with the data use ontology because I think that one really sets the stage. And so that is an ontology that does exactly what it says on the tin. It standardizes how data use conditions are described, and that's based on consent. So you can use our Duo codes that describe, I think there are about 20 or 30 Duo codes, and they describe the different flavors of how data can be described for use. And so, I imagine a world where all the data sets in the genomic space over time will start using something like Duo, and you can very easily figure out, okay, what is the right way to use this data? What are the permissions for this type of data? And from the guardians, okay, now I feel confident that I know how to use this data in a way that is compliant with the custodian's wishes. So I think that's a very exciting piece of work, and linked to that is GA4GH passports and AAI. And so the GA4GH passport lets institutions share researcher credentials in a trusted and federated way. You can kind of think of that as an actual passport, and how you would use your passport at the airport. It's basically saying, I am this person. Here's the identifiable information about me. This is my origin. This is where I come from. And then you have the other side of that coin, which is AAI, which is authentication and authorization infrastructure. And so that provides the sort of technical backbone that allows you to verify that identity as well. And so together, these things are really powerful. And you can imagine a situation where a researcher shows their passport that has been stamped with a visa for the sake of congruency here. And they have several visas that say, this person is allowed to use this data set and this data set and this data set. And so those are all enclosed in their passport. And that passport can be brought from place to place based on which data access they have for various locations where data live. And so let me go to the next one, which is the Data Access Committee Review Standards. And so this is daiquiris. So this is a really important piece of work that is kind of linked to passports and AAI and Duo. And it's making sure that the data access committees have all of the tools they need to evaluate an individual and what they would like to do with data, and feel that they can apply that in a consistent way, decisions around data access. And so there's the next one here that's come up that I think was also of particular interest to people. I think this might have been the top selection. And this is around data discovery and the tooling around that. So these are a set of most of these are all APIs except for experiments metadata standard. And so the experiments metadata standard I'll start with because it's a little bit of on its own here. The experiments metadata standard is allowing those who have done genomic sequencing to have a very minimal but standardized approach to the metadata that comes from a sequencing experiment. And these are also in line with what other big data consumers are using in terms of their metadata capture. And so this would be compliant or consistent with INSDC as well as SRA. So that's a really nice way of sort of tying how do I create the right metadata for my experiment to be able to move eventually into places like ENA or moving into INSDC. So I do think that while it's a very compact set of standard metadata, it's actually a very valuable piece of kit that you can add to your sequencing experiments to just make sure that when it's set up, it's actually set up to be ported directly into the ecosystems in which most people would upload their data. So the rest are around data discovery itself. So service registry and service info are part of our ecosystem that allow people to identify what services in GA4GH are discoverable in a sense. But that's not to say that that is the GA4GH version of the service registry where you can discover info and other services in the GA4GH ecosystem, but you can also use that spec for your own service registry if you would like to do something like that. And then there's things like Data Connect and Beacon. So these are pure discovery tools in the sense of the wider global ecosystem. I think that you've probably heard at least a little bit about Beacon, which is allowing people to surface the data that they have in a discoverable way. And you can query very basic things about those data sets to understand whether those data sets might be of interest to you and whether you might want to go through the data access process to have access to that data. So then we've got accessing the right data. So this is about finding specific genomic data in a context that makes sense to the user. So these are really valuable from the analysis perspective. So I'll start with RefGet, although all of these in themselves are APIs. RefGet ensures that you have consistent access to reference sequences themselves. And then HTS-GET allows for the partial retrieval of just the genomic segment that you're looking for, your genomic segment of interest. And so you can retrieve subsets of those of an individual file or files, and that reduces your need to transfer lots of data from place to place, or dealing with massive downloads. And then RNA-GET is very similar, but it's in reference to gene expression data. And collectively, these APIs are really supporting that efficient and federated analysis without moving entire data sets from place to place. So I think that those are a great place to start if your primary use case is around data analysis, genomic data analysis. And so I would also sort of mention, and I'm not sure if I do get to mention it anywhere else here, but there are some other important standards to kind of mention in the context of the genomic analysis piece, which is not to say that the APIs aren't essential, but there's also things about how you represent data in big databases that is probably worth mentioning. So the variant representation and the variant annotation standards are really important to just sort of highlight. And those are allowing you to ensure consistent description of genomic variation, which I'm sure anyone who's worked with genomic data knows that variant representation has a lot of shapes and sizes and a lot of heterogeneity. And so this is one of those attempts at trying to standardize across that heterogeneous data type. And so I think with that, we can go to, I think, one of the last big sections that people were interested in, which is around scaled analysis infrastructure. And so I would say that this is a space that I think is going to be a really important space to watch in the next couple of years, because we see a lot of desire to either bake in a TRE type ecosystem to a lot of institutions' data infrastructure, so that they can host and manage data in a very secure way, controlling the access to that, and providing an ecosystem for analysis to occur. But that being said, there are an awful lot of TREs coming up over time, and so having standards for accessing your data, having scaled analysis infrastructure in general, being able to toggle between cloud and on-premise environments to analyze and store your data. All of these things are going to become increasingly more important the further into the TRE environment we get. And so I think it's just sort of worth mentioning that this is, I think, a hot space to watch for the next couple of years. And so we've got several different APIs here that are really helpful for thinking about these concepts. So the first one I'll mention is the Data Repository Service, which we lovingly call DRS. And DRS enables uniform sequencing, referencing of data across systems. And so that allows people to spin up their own data repository service within their own ecosystem and be able to reference that data across. And so the tool registry service is the one that's next underneath it. And that lets you sort of discover and share analysis tools. So this is partially a discovery kind of product, but also, sort of geared at the analysis infrastructure piece. And then you've got Workflow Execution Service, which works with a lot of the common workflow languages that you might be familiar with, like Nextflow and others, SnakeMake, things like that. And it's paired with Task Execution Service, and they really standardize how complex workflows and individual tasks can be run. And so those are sort of go hand in hand with each other. And then the last one would be our variant benchmarking tools, which help ensure that your results are accurate, reproducible, and comparable across platforms. So I think that those are the ones that everyone had a primary interest in. Ginny, you can jump in if I missed any of the big ones that people were focused on, but I think I've spent the most time on the ones that people really cared about. Oh, I did mention VERS and very annotation here. And so I think that those are the ones that I would focus on in terms of across ecosystem data analysis and sharing. And so let's see, I think we've got, this is a little bit more on policy. So I will skip past some of the end part of the policy piece just for the sake of time. And this is sort of back to that big graphic. And obviously that was very busy and a whirlwind tour of some of the standards that we have. But I think that overall, if you're really interested in a certain space to GA4GH, this would be the sort of figure that I would come back to and say, okay, what are the products that are an option for needing to be able to discover services, for example, or what are the standards that are available for analyzing data sets? So this is a really nice thing to sort of come back to that sort of points you in the right direction, should you need more information about some of the standards that we have. And with that, there was obviously a lot of complexity in all of the standards that I just talked about. But it's important to sort of point you back to some of the overall GA4GH implementation ecosystem elements that we have. These are either in progress or in late stages of development. Some starter kits we do have already, but right now the implementation registry is something that we are actively building. And this comes from a need to demonstrate that we have lots of standards, right? And people are implementing those standards. And it can be tough to figure out who has code that I could reuse and lift and shift for my own purposes. What standards are being used where? Say I want to do analysis in the UK Biobanks data, for example. Which standards would it be good for my data to be using so that they map directly for easy co-analysis of biobank data with my own? Those are great things you could be asking. And so the implementation registry is going to be helping to solve some of those questions that you might have around what implementations are out there. And next is conformance tracking and testing. And so we are building infrastructure right now for people to be able to look at one of our standards, build an implementation, and go, okay, how conformant am I to that individual standard specification? So the GA4GH tech team is looking into this right now. We have actually quite a lot of work in this space already, and we're hoping to finish off some of these things in the next year or so. And last is starter kits. And so, as I mentioned, having a standard specification and having an implementation are two very different things. One is almost like the blueprint for a house being built, and the other one is a house, right? So if implementations are the house, then our starter kits are like a tiny house. They're the very basic implementation you could hope for, that allows you to test out how an implementation could be used, and give you a very basic piece of kit to play with, and see whether or not it can solve your problem. So I would encourage you to reach out to the tech team if you're interested in starter kits. Something we have a few of those already built, that are our heavy use sort of standards. So please reach out to us if you're interested in that. And with that, I will relinquish control to Angela.
Okay. Actually, I wonder if it would make sense to pause here for questions, just because I'm now going to go into much more about sort of like how to get involved, how GA4GH sort of works functionally. So if anybody has questions, please put them in the Slido and we can pull those up now. I can check and see if there are any here yet. I think I can do that. Maybe not. I should be able to. Yeah, here. Okay, so we have a couple. And then if anybody wants to raise their hand, we can unmute you and you can just ask your question live if you wish. Does that sound right, Sasha? You want to just take a pause here and answer some technical questions?
Sure. So in terms, I'll answer the second question first. How are these being used in practice today? So I think that it's probably important to say that GA4GH in the last decade has been really heads down focused on building standards themselves. And now we're really focused on making sure that those standards are implemented to the best of our ability globally. And just to give you a couple of examples of how these are being used in practice, I think one of the nicest examples is actually in the UK in terms of the depth of standards implementation that we've seen. And so if you look at things like Genomics England, for example, and their data research environment, they have implemented quite a few of our standards in terms of being able to, it's usually the ones that are involved in, so DERS, WEST, and TEST, so task execution, workflow execution, data repository, things that allow people to use, to effectively surface their data, to put it in a way that is, put it in a format that's standardized and run it efficiently, their analyses. I believe that there are future plans to use things like passports and AAI for Genomics England, or support the ability of passports to provide credentialed access to their platform, and that's something that we're actively anticipating in the coming years that will be implemented. I believe they also use Data Connect in their pipeline as well. So you can actually see that, you know, the more resources you start daisy chaining together in terms of our GA4GH products, you start to see the sort of combinatorial power of all of them kind of being used in concert. And so that's just a sort of representative example about how an individual infrastructure can benefit from using these. And you can also imagine a world where a researcher is coming in and wanting to access multiple data sets from different places. Say they want to analyze UK Biobank data at the same time that they're analyzing Genomics England data. And you can imagine, because those are both going to be TREs, your passport and AAI functionality can allow you to have federated access to multiple data sets at the same time because you have visas from both. So these things, like I said, the more people adopt them at scale, the more power they will really have in solving problems for people. And then the second question was, can you give a little more detail about your efficient data storage? So a lot of our products are focused on accessing slices of data as opposed to data storage outright. And that's to allow you to not have as much of a burden of pulling in whole genomes when you don't need to, for example, or similar for RNA expression in data. However, I would say that there's been a lot of development on efficiency of file formats. So if you look at the updates to things like CRAM 3.1, as opposed to previous versions, they've seen up to 30% reduction in file size and things like that. So there is a sort of incremental progress that we're starting to see in the format space. So that kind of speaks to what you're talking about. And again, if you narrow the amount of data you need to access, that's another level of efficiency. But again, not particularly around storage outright. But I think that's a little bit implied. But in terms of just pure data storage, I don't think that there's anything in particular that that is focused solely on that, if that makes sense. And then the next one here is, there are currently a lot of standards available. Are there currently a lot of standards available in bacterial genomics? So I think that there are pockets of things like this occurring in different places. I would say in terms of standards development in general for infectious diseases, there is a big gap. So I think the viral community is much further ahead in terms of standards development for genomics than some of the other spaces are. So I would say bacterial and eukaryotic pathogens are quite not as far as ahead as perhaps the viral community is. but that is something that is very much of interest to us, and something we're sort of actively exploring in our infectious disease community of interest. And so if you are interested in standards development for bacterial genomics, I would suggest joining the community of interest for infectious disease that we have. And there's been a lot of talk about modifying existing GA4GH standards to be applied to the infectious disease genomic space. Because human always, it's unfortunately how this is, that the human genomics community tends to be really far ahead of the other genomics communities. So I do think there's a lot of value potentially in seeing what can be ported, but please reach out to the community of interest for infectious disease for more info on that. So does GA4GH provide paid consulting services for initiatives or institutions working on implementing GA4GH standards or related activities? This is something we've actually had several requests for very recently. And I think that initially it was not something we had done much of, but I think it's something we're increasingly interested in participating in. So if that is something that you're looking for in terms of us supporting your given implementation at your institution, we do have a fully staffed tech team that would be very excited about exploring that space. So please reach out to me or Angela if that's something you're interested in. We'd be happy to discuss it. How many questions should I take, Angela? Because I feel like
yeah, fair. These are the last two. I don't see
okay, cool.
pending. So I'm going to say, if you have more questions, save them until the end because we have a few more slides to get through.
Okay, so no, this is perfect. I was just checking to make sure that it was not like a long list still going. How do you track the standards being implemented? How easy is it for users to engage with them and adopt in their work? This is a billion-dollar question, and it's something that I'm very interested in. So it's important to say that, if there are a bunch of standards out there and people cannot find them, and don't know where they're being implemented, how they're performing, how they can be improved, it's a really big problem, not only for GA4GH, but for the global community. And so this is something we're taking to heart, and the GA4GH tech team is in the process of building an analytics dashboard to track standards implementation, the performance of those standards, how popular they are, how much engagement they're getting over time. And that should really help us understand what the global reach of each of our standards really is. And if you are interested in that, please look at the plenary session that will be from the GA4GH tech team in a couple of weeks. That's about our new analytics dashboard in its first version. So that's our MVP. And yeah, I'm looking forward to showcasing that piece of work. Great question. Do you offer something like a marketplace where other organizations have built their own GA4GH implementations can share so that members can reuse? So this is, I briefly mentioned it, but the implementation registry is meant to do exactly this. It won't be exactly a marketplace, but it will be a place where you can go and do a lookup of all of the Beacon implementations that have been registered in our implementation registry. And you can go, all right, here are all the implementations that we know of. Here's the contact details for those implementations, and you can reach out to those, or hopefully, directly link to their GitHub repos where you can find that implementation that someone else has done. So yes, we're really focused on making sure that you can find these things easily. And last question, where does an institute from an LMIC begin implementing these standards, noting that a standardized infrastructure is lacking? That's a fantastic question. I think that the best thing to do would actually be to reach out to us directly about this, because implementations can have so many different shapes and sizes, and so can infrastructures. I think it's important to have a little bit of a brief consultation about where your institution is at, where infrastructure sits, what is doing well and what needs support. And that way we can be a little bit more targeted about that. But I would say the first thing I would do is actually reach out directly. And also start joining workstream calls on things that are of interest to you, because each workstream has a very rigorous community attached to it with loads of people who are super excited about getting implementers into our ecosystem and supporting those new implementations. So I would say reaching out is the best way to start, so that we can bring that sort of support to the best of our ability.
Agreed. Thank you, Sasha. All right, now I'm going to try to go back to the previous slide. Okay, great. Okay. I will try to make this as brief as possible because this is kind of the boring stuff. Well, maybe not. It gets me up in the morning. GA4GH is a community. This graphic is trying to show how we are sort of supported. So I'm going to, well, okay, so these are older slides, but the purple row really should be on the bottom. Those are our core funders. Right now, those are CIHR in Canada, NIH in the US, NIHR, UKRI, and Welcome in the UK. And those funders support our host institutions, which are OICR in Canada and McGill in Canada, Broad Institute in the US, and Sanger and EBI in the UK. The host institutions are where our staff are based. We have a staff of about 20 or so individuals, including Sasha and myself. We're distributed across those host institutions. And the idea behind sort of how GA4GH is structured with this staff and host institutions is that we can leverage a relatively small amount of funding to direct funding to GA4GH to actually enable this much larger GA4GH community, which is what we're trying to represent in this blue bar here. So those are the 350 plus active contributors that I mentioned at the beginning. These are our funders, partners, and driver projects. A lot of these I mentioned earlier. We are sharing these slides, so just as a kind of FYI about who is currently involved in the community, and if you want to reach out to any of these folks to sort of hear their experiences, these are our most closely connected organizations. I want to flag our assigned expert funders and employers. This is a great opportunity for organizations that are not based in the US, UK, and Canada, do not necessarily get funding from those mechanisms, but want to have a sort of a national commitment to standards development, international genomic standards development. So these are, actually this list is not complete anymore, but these are individuals that have been assigned by their funder or employer to spend at least 30% of their time on standards development. So, the sort of real mission behind this program is really getting more diverse kind of core input into GA4GH in addition to our 20-person staff team, which is based in the US, UK, and Canada. Just a brief bit about how we work, because this is kind of confusing to a lot of people, and I don't blame you. Sometimes I get confused myself. The community is what I just described. These are all these different organizations, individuals that have signed up to be a part of GA4GH. Our staff, like I said, is 20 people. GA4GH staff, GA4GH as an entity doesn't exist without the community. We would be 20 communications, software developer, experts, operations people with nothing to do if we didn't have our community. So driver projects, org members, I mentioned earlier, individual contributors, assigned experts I was just talking about. And then we have some strategic partnerships with organizations like RDA and ISO, where there's an alignment between what we're doing and not necessarily or it isn't so much that the organization would implement GA4GH standards, but that we really need to be aligned as organizations so that what we're doing is interoperable with one another. So that's the community. And then what we sort of provide is a workspace in a way. We use study groups to bring together individuals who have an interest in an emerging topic to define new needs or identify problem statements to say, is this, to determine whether or not it's something that GA4GH should deal with and try to come up with solutions around. If it's decided that a problem statement is appropriate for GA4GH to tackle, it'll be turned into sort of a product team within the context of one of our 8 work streams, which are listed here. And so all of those products that Sasha went through the circle of, they were all developed by one of these 8 work streams. And the development process can take very long. So a lot of stuff sort of sits here in this work stream space for quite a while. And then once the first version has been kind of decided and we are at a mature state, it'll go through the product steering committee for approval. And then we're sort of to the races trying to implement those products in real world contexts and feed learnings and experiences back into the further development and maintenance of the product, or identifying new needs that would come out into study groups. Sasha mentioned the infectious disease community of interest. This is one of a handful of communities of interest where we're really trying to engage the user community more so maybe than the software development or standards development community. So cancer, infectious disease, rare disease, experts can come to these spaces and say, we really need standards in order to advance this particular use case in our domain area. So we also have one in clinical genomics laboratories that's relatively new but very active, and in neuroscience. I want to respond to the question in the chat too about how do LMICs get involved, and I think it was really a technical question which I cannot tackle, but I want to reiterate this point that GA4GH is founded on the human right to benefit from science, but right now we know that we are really not doing a great job of that. The diversity problem in genomic data is getting bigger, and we know that where the world stands right now is, well, I won't get into it, but so the global reach of GA4GH is basically where are our driver projects active. So those are where are the driver projects active. That's across 113 countries. But when you look at where those 350 individuals within GA4GH contributor community actually reside, it's a much, much smaller global footprint. And we recognize that this is a problem. And it is a huge priority for us to start, to continue tackling this. But to the question about LMICs, I think one thing that we have been talking about for a while but haven't actually activated yet, but I think that it's coming, is some kind of a community of interest, like I was talking about, that's really focused on the unique experience of implementing in contexts where there are fewer resources or different infrastructure settings. We only have 5 minutes left, so I'll just briefly say we have a National Initiatives Forum, which is for all of the organizations out there that are merging to do genomics at a national scale, often with a clinical genomics remit, and we're bringing all those organizations together to sort of learn from one another. We will have a day at our plenary meeting that is just for the national initiatives to get together and hear from one another. If you're interested in that, let us know. There are so many ways to get involved in GA4GH. Sometimes it feels like an impenetrable vortex or something, but really, if you're confused, if you're not sure, we are a very nice group of people. You can always email us, but these are some of the many ways that you can directly get involved right away. You can join a work stream, you can advocate for your organization to become an organizational member, you can subscribe to our emails and stay up to date in all of the things. You can come to our meetings. Our next one is, our next in-person meeting is in Uppsala, Sweden, as you probably know, at the the beginning of October, just a couple weeks. This is our board of directors. We have worked really hard to make sure that this community is also representative, so that this group that is sort of making the strategic decisions for GA4GH is doing so with an eye towards representation, equity, and diversity. So that is it. Like I said, please email any of us at any time. These are Sasha's and my emails. You can also email info@GA4GH if you forget our names. We are really excited to hear from you and looking forward to seeing how you can get more involved. If there are more questions, please feel free to raise your hand or put them into Slido. I can check and see if there are any. Doesn't look like there are any pending. We can give it just a moment of awkward silence if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, we will see you, hopefully, in Sweden or online. Yeah. if you want more of this, we're going to do it again later today. Tell your friends, and thank you so much for joining.